Liberal Senator in New South Wales, Hollie Hughes, has just come out of the Senate question time and joins us from Canberra. Welcome, Hollie.
Good afternoon, Smithy. I've just realised it's still not the morning, even though it's been a very quick-moving day.
I bet budget days are like that, aren't they? They're mayhem.
It is. It's less chaotic, I must say, being in the opposition. Not as much fun either.
Yeah, I bet. So it's budget night in Australia for those who are listening from elsewhere. I can't help but see enormous bonuses and increased welfare from this Labor government, which can only spike inflation. It's inescapable, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it's really bizarre when you look at some of the ways that this Labor government's trying to provide cost of living pressure, because at the end of the day, inflation is something that we all experience and we all suffer from. And so bringing down inflation is the only way that we will see all Australians benefit from tonight's budget. That's not going to happen. What we are going to see, I think, we're still yet to see the details, will be a kind of sugar hit for some Australian families. It's not going to benefit in any shape or form all Australian families, but there will be some families who are doing it really tough at the moment who I think will be given a bit of a sugar hit tonight. The problem is all of the measures, despite the rhetoric that this Labor government is spouting, all of the measures are only going to feed inflation. The fact that you are putting more money into the pockets of people, low and middle income earners, whom are spending every dollar, that is going to add to inflationary pressures. The only way that we can reduce inflation is if we reduce spending, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see much of that tonight.
Yeah, so that's not great news for those hanging on to mortgages and hoping they're about to turn around. Now, with 500,000 unemployed in Australia and 450,000 jobs unfilled, how can any treasurer in his right mind up the amount for JobSeeker? It's outrageous.
Well, we've got the Greens today calling for it to be raised across the board, whereas we think tonight that they're going to announce an increase for over 55s. This is, in so many ways, I think, just ridiculous. It again, will be inflationary in its impact. But what we are hearing seniors call for, and what we are hearing from a number of groups, and certainly we as an opposition have put forward, to ensure that we can get people into the workforce, which will boost our productivity, which will help in the long term, to turn the economy around and reduce inflation, is to look at pensioners, people that are currently receiving a pension, to allow them to work more hours without losing their pension, so without being penalised. And we know that we can inject thousands of workers back into the workforce. So there's no excuse at the moment for not being able to find a job. There is more work out there than you can poke a stick at, and it is everywhere. Quite often you hear people based in rural and regional areas struggle to find a job. I speak to people in rural towns and regional centres all the time, and business owners, and they are crying out for staff across the board. And a lot of this is low-skilled or no-skilled work as well. So there's really no excuse for not being able to find a job at the moment. And so it's a strange part of the budget that I think we're going to see tonight.
And when they all stand in rousing applause because Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, declares a technical surplus, they might have a very small window to applaud because it's not necessarily that real, is it?
No, and the thing that this surplus is going to be coming from is both an increase in income tax receipts. So because so many people are in the workforce, there is a boon to the government from income tax receipts, but also from our resources sector. There is a huge amount of money coming into the government because Matthias Cormann, 10 years ago when he was finance minister, baked in very conservative resource prices because they are record highs in many areas and at very high levels. There is actually a river of gold flowing into this government. The irony is that this government is the one that is looking to shut down the resources sector in so many ways. So the surplus that we see, albeit briefly, may be one we never see again if this government gets its way, and particularly standing in the way of future coal and gas projects.
The National Party leader, David Littleproud, is backing the correct horse, I think. He's convinced rural Australia will be dudded by tonight's budget. He'll be spot on, won't he?
Absolutely. No, there's absolutely no shadow of doubt that we're going to see money ripped out of the regions because we know those regions don't vote Labor. And we are going to see so many projects that have already sort of been through quite considerable processes just be cancelled right overnight because that is where they're going to start to pull some funding from. We saw recently in the mobile phone black spot program that Minister Rowland was overseeing that she just allocated the funds straight into Labor seats. There was no need to apply. Minister Rowland was just going to put the money where she wanted to. And I think that's what we're going to see in infrastructure tonight. We're going to see a lot of projects being cancelled. A lot of projects aren't going to go ahead or delayed. And these are primarily in rural and regional areas. And that money will just not be going to boost the lives of rural and regional Australians who didn't vote for this government. They're not a government for all. They're a government for people that voted for them.
Of course they're not a government for all. Absolutely not. What do you make of the $100,000 payout to Teal staffer Sally Rugg? It's a bad look for Teal MP Monique Ryan, her former boss, and her apparently ferocious personality.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that those of us that are lectured by the Teals regularly on their sanctimonious platform of openness, transparency and, fairy floss for all, that perhaps working in that office wasn't as quite a joyous experience as Sally Rugg thought it was going to be. Yeah. I mean, I read a lot of the material over some of the work conditions, requests that were made of her, and it did seem that there were some that were, probably a little bit unreasonable, but many of those requests are pretty standard in a political office. Most political staffers, and I've been a political staffer a couple of decades ago, not for a long time, but you worked long hours. We've got budget estimates in a couple of weeks. One of my staff will be with me, and we'll start 7 a.m, and we'll be lucky to be finished by 11:30 at night, and that'll be over a 2-week period. So
it's the culture. That's how it works.
Long hours are pretty standard in politics. I don't think you come into this looking for a 9-to-5 job. It doesn't exist. But I think obviously the expectations of the Teals are a little bit different to the rest of us.
Yeah. The US ambassador...
Staff get paid a bonus, by the way. Staff get paid.
Oh, do they?
On a point. So on a point system, they get allocated additional salary that is there to compensate for overtime. So it's in lieu of overtime. They get paid a point system because if it was to be an overtime program, the administration would just be a nightmare. So we as members and senators allocate points to our staff with looking around how many extra hours they have to do.
That is a good system, a simple system. Yep. All right, the US ambassador to Australia, Carolyn Kennedy, has met a delegation of MPs, Julian Assange supporters, in what could lead to the release of the Australian. Surely this case, after so many years, Hollie, needs to be shut down, needs to be closed, and Assange deported to Australia.
Yeah, I have a different view, Chris.
Do you?
I think what Julian Assange did was very damaging to many people in the Australian Defence Force. It was very damaging to a lot of covert operations and those security agencies. And, he has never faced trial for it. He has hid out in an embassy. This is dragged on because of the behaviour of
But no one has died. No one died because of what he did?
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. Because
so if you're going to accuse him of doing something that leads to someone's death, it's those who make that accusation who have to provide the evidence, and no evidence has been provided.
It was putting people at risk. Well, it's never gone to trial, so there's never been any evidence put because it's never gone to trial. It's all sort of been at an allegation level, but it's never gone to trial. It's never been tested. There's never been any real review of what the outcomes were. But it was, putting people at risk. And, we know that, and I cannot remember, well, it was a him when he was charged, but is now her, the person in the US who did a similar thing. Well, they faced trial and went to jail for what they did. That has
we're now getting to a situation where Assange has been locked up by authorities, both in the UK and elsewhere, for as long as he'll probably get a sentence for the charges that have not been laid against him yet. It is a waste of court time. Just deport him back to Australia.
Well, it could have been all over, had he not hidden out in an embassy for 8 or 9 years. So,
That's dumb.
I have a different view that if you can manage to avoid the law for a substantial period of time, that it should all just go away.
All right. I take a journalistic approach that I think what Julian Assange did was unveil things that the United States wasn't prepared to admit. Of course he was.
He's not a journalist. He was a hacker who uploaded material. He didn't do analysis or interview people or verify sources. He just put up, documents.
Okay. Let's agree to disagree. Finally, the National Rugby League.
We had to have something, Chris.
Exactly. It's about time. Has become the first Australian football code to back the yes case at the Indigenous Voice referendum. This is all about looking inclusive, obviously, right?
Look, get back to what your core business is.
Scrums.
I don't think there's a woke agenda that the football codes haven't jumped on recently. I mean, we had the furor last year around Manly and the Pride jersey, et cetera, which is supposed to be all about inclusiveness, yet it was incredibly exclusionary to a number of Manly players. I think this is the same. There are players within the NRL who won't want to support this. There will be fans of clubs, there will be members of clubs that aren't in the yes camp, yet they're going to have their overarching body overrule them. I think both corporates and sporting fields should get back to their core business and worry about the returns they're either providing for their fans or their shareholders, and stop trying to virtue signal their way through.
Exactly. And the way they answer all of this is, we're not going to get political. Sport and politics shouldn't mix. We will support Indigenous Australia as much as we possibly can, but we're not supporting any side in the referendum. It's a political matter for people's own judgment. But in the meantime, we are going to do all we can to foster and support Indigenous players and communities. That's all I had to say.
Yep. And there are plenty of Indigenous people who don't support the Voice. So
exactly.
They don't support Indigenous Australians. They support the Indigenous Australians who they agree with. Yeah. And, again, this is just something that is going to continue to divide this nation, and I don't think we've seen it at its bottom yet.
Okay. I've got to get to a news update. Thank you so much for running out of question time and coming onto the program. We appreciate it. All the best for budget night. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Liberal Senator in New South Wales, Hollie Hughes. At least she's got a firm view on these things. Just because we disagree is not a bad thing, I might add. We'll agree to disagree on that. The time has come for Assange to be deported, to be sent back home, and this case totally and utterly closed.